Hi, I'm Aubrey Plaza, and I'm going to read an excerpt from The Legend of the Christmas Witch.
'Twas the season of Yuletide, and as the cold moon shone down, the Christmas witch traveled to each little town. While mother and father slept soundly in bed, some children snuck to their windows instead. They fixed their eyes on the falling snow in hopes for a glimpse of the witch's shadow. Like a wondrous phantom who smelled of the sea, she whistled in the darkness a strange melody. A wreath made of feathers, a doll made of hair, peculiar gifts left on the doorstep with care. Though gathered at the window, they caught not a sight as the Christmas witch disappeared into the night. No doubt you've never heard the name of Kristtörn, for the legend of the Christmas witch is a story that has been forgotten to time. But in her day, she was as familiar to children as Santa Claus. In fact, she is his long-lost twin sister, who, for many fated reasons, ended up at the South Pole. Stories and songs were written about her, yes, but as the years went on, these tales, told in whispers around the fire, became nothing more than scary stories meant to frighten children. Convinced of her evil nature, the elders were determined to erase all memory of her, and they have succeeded. Until now. The tale I'm about to tell may seem too fantastic to be true, but I assure you it did happen. This is the real story of how Kristtörn became the Christmas witch. And I should know, I was there. M. Many, many years ago, when the world was much younger and magical beings freely roamed the earth, a pair of twin infants with red hair and green eyes was abandoned in the middle of the Black Forest. Left all alone, the deer, the foxes, and even the squirrels of the forest watched over them, bringing them food and protecting them from the wilder and more dangerous creatures of the woods. The boy's name was Christopher, and his sister was named Kristtörn. They were no ordinary pair of twins, for before long they discovered they each had a unique set of gifts. Kristtörn had the ability to talk to animals, and with a touch of her hand, she was able to make trees and bushes grow and produce fruit. The two of them never went hungry. Christopher was able to disappear and reappear at will, and both twins shared the gift of swiftness, running around the woods at fantastic speeds. Their favorite game to play was hide and seek, and each could hide from the other for many hours before being found. Sometimes Kristtörn would leave a trail of little gifts made of twigs and leaves from the forest for Christopher to find. As time passed, they developed their own secret way of communicating by whistling, imitating the strange melodies of their friend the nightingale. At night, they would lie in the clearing and count the stars in the heavens. Their bond was deep and eternal. It so happened that one day, while they were playing together, they heard two people talking nearby in the woods. They had never encountered other people, so Christopher whistled to his sister to go hide in a thicket, where he was as brave as she was shy. By and by, a Danish couple by the name of Kringle came passing through the forest clearing heading north. It was then that the boy smelled the most delicious aroma he had ever smelled and hesitantly approached them. "Look at this young child," they exclaimed, for they had always dreamed of having a family but weren't able to have children of their own. "I wonder what his name is." "My name is Christopher," he said. To his surprise, he was able to speak to them in their own language. "Where are your parents, and why have they left you all alone?" "I have no parents," he said, reaching toward the basket the woman was carrying, from which came that most enticing smell. She picked up the young boy in her arms and handed him a warm cinnamon roll from her basket. Watching from the thicket, Kristtörn saw the woman pick up her brother. She called after them, fearing he was being kidnapped, but her cries only sounded like the mournful song of a nightingale. "Oh, what a beautiful bird," the man exclaimed. "We will always remember how magical this forest was where we found this lad." Christopher, delighted by the pastry, greedily reached for another and momentarily forgot about his sister as the new family journeyed on. Soon, they could no longer hear her frantic song. Now, without her brother, Kristtörn found herself truly alone, and she began to sob big, angry tears. For 3 days and nights she wept, and no animal, large or small, could comfort her. On the 4th day, a witch named Lutzelfrau heard her cries while gathering gray mushrooms with her raven friend perched on her shoulder. The old witch found Kristtörn in the thicket and noticed that a beautiful holly bush had sprung up in a perfect circle around the child, protecting her with sharp leaves that repelled the wild wolves hunting for food at dusk. "Why do you cry, my child?" the witch asked. But this only made Kristtörn's tears flow faster. The old woman knelt down and stuck her bony hands into the bush to try to pick her up. But though she was careful, she pricked her little finger on the leaves and it began to bleed. "Ouch!" Lutzelfrau shrieked. But then the child inside the bush reached out her own little finger and locked it with the witch's, and the wound immediately healed. Lutzelfrau was astonished to see that there remained not a scratch on her hand. "This child is one with nature, and was born with a magic that may rival my own. She must be protected," she said to an old raven named Malachi, who flew close behind and caw-cawed in agreement. With that, she pulled Kristtörn out of the bush, placed her in the large satchel around her neck, and took her back to her cottage. From that day on, Kristtörn was raised under Lutzelfrau's care. The Kringles returned to Aalborg, and as they had no children of their own, decided to adopt Christopher. The husband, Johan, was an expert woodcutter and craftsman. The wife, Clara, a marvelous baker, was known in her village for a delicious pastry that she made each Christmas called kringle. As Christopher grew up in the small port village along the Limfjord, his family instilled in him a strong sense of duty and hard work. He spent the days learning his father's trade and was particularly fond of creating new toys that he would share with his friends in the village. In the evenings, he would watch his mother bake breads and other sweets, and helped her to deliver them to the townsfolk on the family sled. Meanwhile, Kristtörn was living a wild, carefree life in the forest. She cultivated her magical abilities under Lutzelfrau's watchful eye and found that she was a quick learner. At the same time, she could also lose her temper quite easily when a spell wouldn't turn out quite right. One time, out of frustration for a spell gone wrong, she kicked the side of a large old oak tree, making a huge dent in its side. But she was immediately sorry for what she had done. "I vow to never lose my temper like that again," she said. Sometimes at night, after the old woman was asleep, Kristtörn would gaze out the window in the thatched roof above her bed and count the stars. Somewhere, she felt sure, in some other part of the world, her brother was doing the same. And someday, she knew she would follow the course of those stars and find him.
Read the full story in The Legend of the Christmas Witch.